Welcome to Behind the Muscle podcast. Today's guest is an NPC bodybuilder. Today's guest is Ty Jordan. Ty, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, what's up, Quentin? Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me on, my man.
Yeah, for sure, Ty. So I know you're deep into prep. We're gonna discuss all of that here in a little bit. So thank you so much for taking a little time to chop it up. I want to ask you, who are a few of your favorite bodybuilders of all time?
Yeah, let's start with some of the legends from the 90s. Favorite bodybuilder, probably hands down, the man, Kevin Levrone. Huge fan of Kevin. And I'd say I tend to gravitate towards bodybuilders that have similar hallmarks as Kevin, some of the shape guys, the shoulder arm guys, like the Phil Heaths and the Levrones of the world. Those are the bodybuilders for me, for sure.
Awesome. Are there a couple guys like currently in the IFBB that you really look up to? You really respect their physique?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a fan of everybody, but I would say the physique that probably connects with me the most in the current landscape of the IFBB would probably be Sergio Oliva Jr. When you factor in the height, you factor in the shape, you factor in the structure, kind of a bigger athletic structure. And then the focus that he emphasizes and places on the posing. I connect with all of that. So I would say modern day Sergio Oliva Jr. is probably who I'm most trying to emulate or model my game after.
Very cool. Love that. All right. So Ty, tell us, at what age did you start lifting weights? And then why did you start lifting weights at that age?
Yeah, pretty cliche story. I started lifting weights probably around 13 or 14 with the idea of, kind of putting on the necessary body armor to get out there on the gridiron, make sure I didn't get smashed up too much. I was about 145 or 150 pounds when I was 14 years old. So felt like that was definitely the prerequisite thing to do before I got out there on the gridiron as a freshman in high school.
Excellent. All right. So why don't you tell us a little bit, if you don't mind, Ty, about your upbringing, your childhood. It's always kind of cool to just hear about all of the guests, all the bodybuilders' upbringing a little bit. So why don't you talk about where you grew up, talk about some of the sports you were involved with, talk about anybody or anything that really maybe shaped, impacted that childhood up to about high school, and then we'll move on from there.
Yeah, sure thing. So born and raised in the Kansas City area. I've lived on both the Kansas and the Missouri side. I get asked about my background a lot. I am a mixed race individual. I've got an African-American mother and a Jewish-American father. And my parents were divorced from a pretty young age growing up. So with that mixed race background and the divorced parents, came a bit of an ongoing identity crisis, through my upbringing. My mother had us in kind of more of a blue collar, middle class part of town, whereas my father and my siblings, they grew up in kind of a more white collar, ritzier part of town. So, there was kind of a constant identity crisis, based off of peer groups and associations and such. Also, when kids are young, they don't really understand skin color and things like that quite as well as we all do now. And then also factor in, I dealt with a lot of weight struggles as a child, similar to kind of like an Evan Senapani story. I was kind of like your classic 90s. I think the phrase that everyone liked to use back then was husky. Yeah. So, I was your, mezzo, endo, husky style, kid, kind of an identity crisis, looking for something to belong to. And, with a single mother who, she had to take us everywhere. My twin sister and I, she didn't really feel comfortable leaving us at home. We found ourselves going with her on a lot of the day-to-day errands. And before long, I often found myself at most stores, grocery stores, Targets, and things like that, sitting on the floor back by the magazine aisle, flipping through the Muscular Development, Muscle and Fitness, the Flex magazine. And that's really how it all started for me.
So now you mentioned starting lifting weights to play football. So talk to us a little bit about sports. What sports did you play besides football? And did sports kind of help you with that identity crisis? Did you find some comfort? Did you find some escape within sports? If so, just talk about that for a minute, Ty, please.
Yeah. So, I always loved sports from a very, very early age. Even when I wasn't someone that you would describe with any type of real athletic prowess from a young age. You know, I was still a kid in the backyard throwing the football up to myself at age 6, 7, 8, you know, envisioning that one day I would be in the NFL or, you know, maybe the MLB or the NBA. You know, I love football, basketball, and baseball all equally. But by the time I got into high school, I was in my freshman year, I was playing high school football, and I broke my leg in the middle of the season. And that injury basically put an end to all of my other extracurricular sports activities. I was not able to go out for basketball as a freshman. I didn't bother with baseball as a freshman. So really just honed in on two things, which was football, and then it was weightlifting / you know, powerlifting and stuff in the off season. So I did ultimately find my place in football. By the time I was a junior, you know, I found myself all league. You know, by the time I was a senior, once again, you know, all league, fielding a lot of offers from local and regional universities to go on and play college football. But at that time, I was also falling deeply, deeply in love with the weights, the powerlifting, the bodybuilding, and the strongman. I would say my first love out of those three was definitely the bodybuilding, since, you know, I kind of told you about finding myself on the floor at 13, 14, and 15, flipping through the magazines and such. But objectively at the time, I didn't really see a whole lot of bodybuilding potential within my God-given genetics. You know, I wasn't really able to identify, you know, my shape at that point, and my structure was a little wonky. I was still kind of skinny fat. So I kind of instinctively knew that I probably had a better place in powerlifting and strongman. So that's where I put a lot of my energy. And, you know, by the time I was graduating high school, I was actually already very actively competitive in strongman. And I found myself competing in the national level as a teen, and ultimately went on to win the teenage heavyweight national championship in strongman. So that was a very, very huge moment in my life. And that actually pushed me away from the gridiron after just 1 year as a true starter, as a true freshman in college, to go ahead and focus full steam on strongman. And I would say about that time, that was when the sport really kind of started to break into another territory, with guys like Brian Shaw and Hafthor Bjornsson really kind of taking the forefront, you know, at like 6'7", 6'8", 400, 450 pounds. And, you know, at the time I was really looking up at guys like Mariusz Pudzianowski and Derek Poundstone, you know, who I could really relate to as guys that were, you know, closer to 6 foot, sported very like rugged aesthetic physiques, you know, something that someone with a bodybuilding interest could still really relate to. You know, those guys had, you know, thick, you know, developed abs and nice pecs and big delts and arms, and they actually competed with their shirts off. And for me, that was kind of like the best of the both worlds. But the sport very quickly moved away from those guys and moved into the bigger builds. And once again, I found myself kind of like without a home. And after a while, the writing was kind of on the wall. So ultimately, I moved myself over into bodybuilding, and it's been a good move. Yeah, that was about, I want to say 2013 when I decided to make that transition into bodybuilding full time.
Okay, so before we get a little bit more in depth into like the physical culture and all that, I want to take a step back into kind of like your younger years, your childhood. Was there a coach, or was there an adult figure in your life when you were younger that really, looking back, had a positive influence on you, or, you know, maybe spoke some really encouraging words into your life, or not really?
No, not really. For me, it's always been a deep intrinsic motivation. And to further that point, kind of a deep dissatisfaction with where I felt like my life was going or would be going if I wasn't going to take a strong, purposeful role in circumventing that and going another direction with it. So I've always kind of felt like it was in my hands and up to me to decide what my destiny was going to be.
Perfect. Okay, so you're wrapping up high school. You start kind of getting involved in strength training, and you said strongman and all that. Now, I think you mentioned playing a year of college football. What were you kind of planning on doing career-wise once you were wrapping up high school? And then how did that kind of unfold in terms of going to college? What did you study? What were you planning to do with your life in terms of a career?
You know what? From like the age of 5 years old, that question has always brought like an immense amount of, discomfort and fear into my heart. And, like a man child, I've always done my very, very best to kind of put thoughts like that out of my mind. And luckily, the American education system, which I think is a complete joke, really kind of sets you up to be able to like take that. How do I want to describe that? Like, I guess I would say kind of take that irresponsible point of view towards the academic system and a future career. And that, our American education system is kind of set up to kind of push you into university and general education. And they kind of make it seem like it's okay to not really know what you're going to do and where you're going to go. And you're just going to find your footing in college. So I kind of just left it all up to that. Didn't worry too much about it. Focus on what was important to me, which was, my athletic endeavors, dating, things like that. All of this stuff that's like in the forefront, 6 feet in front of you. I wasn't really worried about 6 years in front of me or anything like that. I mean, I always had a pretty good idea that I'd go to school and study business and, learn how to operate business and, just find something from there. And that's ultimately what I did. I did get a 4-year degree in business management, the marketing concentration. I'm sure you've probably heard people make quotes about learning how to successfully operate business in a lot of other situational areas and things in life outside of the confines of school. And without going too much into detail there, you definitely say I learned a lot more about how to be a successful practicing businessman in my years post-graduate school than I did in my 4 years of general education.
For sure. For sure. I think that echoes to a lot of us out there. So, all right. So you start getting into strongman. What was it about strongman specifically, Ty, that you valued or you appreciated when you really got into it? What was it that kind of pulled you into that culture? And then we'll kind of get into the transition into bodybuilding.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I think it's human nature to naturally gravitate towards things that you feel like you've got a chance to be good at. I think all of us want to find things that we have, a chance to succeed at from the early going, rather than make everything in life just an uphill battle and a constant struggle. And, like when I first broke into powerlifting, it was pretty apparent to me that once again, this is probably not the best fit for me. I've got very long arms, very long legs, and a short torso. And there's only one of the 3 power lifts that really favors, and that's the deadlift. So I found myself at a distinct disadvantage in both the squat and the bench press. And I had it explained to me that in order to counteract some of those unfavorable leverages, I was probably going to need to be, north of 300 pounds. And, it was what it was. But I learned very quickly once strongman was introduced to me that actually matched up with my natural talent base a lot better. And that there was a lot of moving events. I was a pretty agile, quick, athletic guy. I'd grown into my body as a 6-footer with a long limb, so I could cover a lot of territory and a lot of ground. And I was very good at picking weights up off the ground too, which you do a lot of that in strongman, whether it be Atlas stones, tires, farmer's walks, pick it up and move it. So and the strength athlete or the strength athletic world, it picks up a lot of powerlifters that are a little more privy towards things like the squat and the bench, with the shorter limbs and the longer torso. And I found that when I would get into contests against those types of guys, there's actually more events that suited me as a moving guy and a deadlifter than events that suited the stouter, more static geared athletes. So I felt like it was just a really, really good fit for me and something I could really grow into and flourish. And, I was right. I did my first contest in 2012. Yeah, I did my first contest in 2012, and I had won my first national championship maybe 6 months later. And I went on to win about 5 contests in the next 2 years. So it was a very fruitful sport for me, but unfortunately, again, the direction of the sport combined with the injury bug that came with it ultimately put me away from it within just a couple short years.
Now, did once you kind of got involved in strongman, Ty, and you kind of found out maybe that, hey, this is something that I'm good at, or at least there's some potential, you're winning and you're seeing success. Did that kind of help give you some sort of an identity that maybe you struggled finding when you were younger?
Oh, it absolutely did. All I wanted from a very, very young age, know what it was like to be on the other side of things, to not feel like the underdog, to not feel like the guy on the outside looking in. So it's really surreal to be a winner and, to have really earned that. And, to take that story just a little bit farther, I actually made my first attempt at winning that teenage heavyweight national championship just like 3 months into my introduction to the sport. And I took 8th out of 16th at the teenage nationals in Chicago. Some of you guys that check this out might have already heard the story before on my YouTube, but that contest actually ended in tragedy, and that I actually sharded on the Atlas Stones there in Chicago on the final event. So had to go home figuratively and literally, I shit the bed, I shit myself. So that was really disappointing, but I took the positives and the negatives from that experience, and I really honed in. And 1 year later, I found myself winning that contest in Boston, Massachusetts. So yeah, that really kind of reshaped my life. And gosh, it's been a long time since that moment, but I still carry a lot of those vibes with me, and I'm really looking to finally capitalize on that feeling in the sport of strongman. I'm sorry, in the sport of bodybuilding.
For sure. Okay, so let's talk about that transition then, Ty, from a strongman competition into bodybuilding. Now, before you kind of get too deep into that transition story, do you feel like having that foundation of strongman and strength with kind of like odd objects and a little bit of powerlifting, do you feel like that foundation really set you up for success in terms of putting on muscle and having maybe a denser look to your muscle once you transitioned into bodybuilding?
I think it was tremendously helpful. I think a lot of guys will come into a sport like bodybuilding, having spent a lot of time, accruing muscle and some of the showier body parts like the pecs, the delts, and the arms. And of course, that's monumentally important, even more so today with, what's going on with the advent of the classic physique. But we all know that traditional bodybuilding and modern bodybuilding requires a dense amount of muscle in both the legs and the back, and a general level of thickness and density that you can't fake on stage. You either have it, you've done the work, or you haven't. And so I was able to come into bodybuilding with a pretty appreciable level of overall thickness and density. I'd already sported a 700 plus pound deadlift and a 600 pound squat, and again, with that comes a lot of thickness and density. So for me, it was more of a matter of actually getting some of the showier body parts to catch up in terms of that thickness and density component, particularly the pecs and the upper back muscles,
Excellent. So talk about transitioning then from strongman into bodybuilding. Like, when did you kind of start thinking about that transition? Why did you make that transition? Did you have somebody that kind of helped point you in the right direction for that transition? Was it all on your own? Just kind of unpack that story. And then I'm looking forward to getting into competition talk and where we're at today.
Yeah, so that bug kind of started getting planted in my ear when I would show up to the strongman contest, and all the big heavy guys would say, "Oh, the cute guys here," because I was kind of lean, and I had some faint outlines of some abs, and at that point I had done enough lifting that my natural inherent shape was really starting to show through. A lot of guys know I've got pretty naturally round shoulders, decently shaped arms, things like that. So yeah, they kind of started calling me the cute guy or the pretty one. So that was where the bug kind of started to get planted. And, along with just all of the signs that I saw with the direction of the sport of the strongman, and, just running into the injury bug over and over again, particularly low back, hip, glute injuries, things that didn't allow me to progress at the rate of strength development of some of my peers. Again, the writing was just on the wall. It was time to make a move.
So talk about just transitioning into bodybuilding. How did you kind of, start training specifically for bodybuilding? Did you do it on your own? Did you learn it through YouTube videos? Did you have somebody kind of teaching you, mentoring? Talk about that a little bit, Ty.
Yeah, so a close friend of mine that had actually introduced the first strongman to me had actually already started to dabble in a little bit of bodybuilding, and he's actually no longer participating in any of this stuff. He's totally out of this world, but I do thank him for that, the introduction to both. But I would say the transition was probably the part that I struggled with the most, in that anybody that has spent an appreciable amount of time performing strength athletics understands that it's a sport of leverages. It's a sport of learning how to move weight efficiently, and it's a sport of learning how to get weight from A to B, the most effective, efficient way possible. And that's completely antithetical to everything that bodybuilding is. A good bodybuilder is finding a way to make everything truly as hard as possible, whether that weight in your hand is 5 pounds or 50 pounds. And so really hard concepts for me to grasp at first. And also really trying to develop a mind muscle connection was a very difficult concept for me. So, I ultimately feel like as a 31-year-old man that I could be where I'm at. I probably could have been where I'm at now much sooner had I had a little bit more hands-on guidance inside of the gym. I learned very quickly that you do need coaches to help you strategize and plan and, effectively get into these shows and not embarrass yourself. So I did, start working with coaches very quickly, but I didn't understand the value of finding somebody to teach me how to train right until probably 2017, 2018 and beyond. And that was when I really started applying myself with learning how to train better, starting to adopt some of the training principles that were becoming more and more popularized out there, things like progressive overload, getting a better understanding of reps and reserve training, and just getting a better understanding of form, biomechanics, and how to get the most out of my training instead of just showing up and putting in hard work.
So let's expound on that point a little bit in terms of the training, because I know a lot of people listening or watching love training like we do, and that's a huge part of this bodybuilding process. So what would you say, Ty? What are one or two things that you've kind of learned over the years that has really been able to help progress your training to the point where you're putting that muscle tissue on those areas that you really are focusing on? So a couple things that have really catapulted your training over the years, if you don't mind sharing that.
Yeah. So like I mentioned, when I came into bodybuilding, I had a pretty appreciable amount of muscle and kind of the low back and erectors and the low lats, and my legs were fairly well developed, particularly around the quadriceps and the glutes and the hamstrings. But the areas where I was really lagging was particularly through the chest and up through the upper back. I had some pretty big traps, but I didn't have any, real upper lat or teres major development to speak of. And both that particular region in the rear, as well as my pecs, were really, really hard areas for me to grow and develop and connect with. So ultimately learning how to properly disengage the shoulder girdle and to be able to identify what a true chest contraction was, and to learn how to appreciate that, develop it, and pursue strength development through quality chest contractions rather than just through pressing weight from A to B. That was a really, really long time coming. But once you learn how to do that, it's all downhill from there in terms of putting on, the chest density and stuff. And then similarly, learning how to actively connect with some of those muscles in the back, as opposed to just reverting back into the movement patterns that all of us do, which tend to favor trapezius development. Again, took a really, really long time, but now that I really feel like I've honed in on those two areas within the last couple of years, my physique has probably made a bigger jump in that time than it probably made in the 5 to 7 years before that. So I think a lot of competitors can probably identify with the nonlinear timetable of muscular development that comes with this process. A lot of us will kind of spin our wheels in our early 20s, unfortunately, during our prime growth years, just not really knowing what we're doing. But some of us are just lucky enough to kind of figure it out in our late 20s into the early 30s, when the ability to put on that quality muscle tissue is, really prime.
For sure. Would you say then, it kind of sounds like from what you're sharing with us, Ty, that mind to muscle connection has really been that one game changer for you in terms of bodybuilding progress? Is that fair to say?
I would say it's very fair to say. Anybody that scrolls through my Instagram, if you run it back to like 2017, you'll see 500-pound barbell rows. You'll see 400-pound for 10 barbell rows, 455 for 6. And these lifts aren't ugly by any stretch of the measure. Like they're fairly clean from an observer's perspective. But even a lift that looks clean from an observer's perspective is not necessarily one that is tapping into the true mind muscle connection required to accrue tissue. And that's not to say there aren't bodybuilders out there that have successfully put on heaps of muscle, I don't want to say slinging weight, but moving weight semi-cleanly, but maybe not connecting with it. I know that works for some guys, but for me, I actually need the full connection. And, that entails pulling, 100, 125 pounds off the bar sometimes to ensure that I feel that all the way through to the back end of the peak contraction. And I think that's just really important for a lot of guys, particularly your taller, bigger frame guys where the range of motion is inherently longer and the ability for ancillary muscles like biceps, rear delts when you're pulling, or say deltoids, front deltoids and triceps when you're pressing. I think the bigger and longer you are, the more likelihood that those ancillary muscle groups are going to rob you of peak prime mover development. And in that case, I think it takes even more diligence in finding the right movements for you, because I think less of the bread and butter works for us taller guys. I think taller guys that strictly rely on, say, squat, bench, and deadlift are almost always going to have very imbalanced physiques and very underdeveloped limbs too. So yeah, I think the bigger you are, the more detailed and nuanced your training, unfortunately, kind of has to be.
Right. One more question about training, and then we'll kind of get back into your competing and stuff. You mentioned chest has been kind of like one of those body parts from the get-go that you've really been working on to bring up and to add tissue there. Are there a couple movements that you've really found that work in terms of chest training for you specifically? And if you don't mind sharing those with us, what would those be, Ty?
Yeah, of course. So like a lot of guys, the first thing that really helped me kind of nail this down like 3 or 4 years ago was going with some isolation principles and, exhausting myself with different varieties of flies before getting into the presses. I think that's a great tried and true strategy for a lot of guys that feel like their presses tend to be front delt and tricep dominant. But I think it's also important that once you identify your ability to move past that point, that you quickly do, and you do get back and utilizing your presses first and foremost in your routine once you've built and consolidated that good mind muscle connection. So now that I do possess that, I start just about every single chest session off, and have done so for the last 15 months, with a Smith machine incline press. That is my absolute hand down bread and butter mass builder, and I don't think I would trade it for anything. I'm a big believer in the incline, but I love the stability component I get from the Smith machine. It makes it really easy for me to keep my shoulder girdle out of the movement all the way till the end of the set. And that movement also lends itself to some intensity multipliers that you don't quite feel the same way when you do them with a free barbell. So whether it be rest pause work or drop set work, I love to implement all that stuff on my incline barbell Smith presses. And I've seen some great results.
Perfect. Love that. All right. So Ty, why don't you share with us when you first started to compete, when was your first competition? And then just share a little bit about your competition history, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Sure thing. So I went ahead and did my first show in 2013. It was the NANBF KC Classic here in Kansas City. If you heard me say NANBF, that's right. That is a natural federation. It was really important for me as I got into the bodybuilding world to kind of determine if I had the mental prowess to get through that process of the contest prep and the rigors associated with that before bothering with dabbling with the performance enhancement side of the sport. So yes, I did my first show, 2013, came into the show weighing about 196 pounds at 6 foot. So, a little undersized for a tall guy, but brought some appreciable muscle. In the natural feds, they do those by height, not weight. So in the tall class, I did both novice and open, and I took 4th place in both. Not unusual. Got beat by the same 3 guys in both classes. And I got enough from that experience to know that this was in fact for me. But, I'm a smart guy. I knew that as a 6-foot bodybuilder, I probably needed to one day be 240 to 270 pounds, to be competitive. So I took the next 3 years, took my time off, pretty quickly started dabbling with PEDs, as I understood that's where I am trying to go. I wanted to do this at the highest level. And I had a firm understanding that the sport had always walked hand in hand with, the PEDs. So I took 3 solid years off. And in 2016, I made my NPC debut at the NPC Midway Championships over in Wichita, Kansas. Won the super heavyweights there, missed the overall. And since then, I've been competing basically every other year since then. I'll take about a year off, try to improve, come back, see what I've done. And I've been kind of following that strategy ever since.
Awesome. It's kind of cool because I'm in Iowa, so in the Midwest, just like you. And the NAMBF is actually the organization that I compete in. So I personally am very familiar with that organization, and they do put on a lot of great competitions for the drug-free athletes. So talk to us a little bit, Ty, about the necessity of taking time off to put on the tissue to grow. I think we see a lot, especially in terms of social media, Instagram. Everybody wants to kind of get into bodybuilding and just compete. But why is it important for us athletes to take time off to make that progress in bodybuilding?
Yeah, I think, once you've done this for a while, you realize that even when you're doing everything right, for consistent periods of time, muscle growth is unfortunately not linear. And, it's a process where we have to really kind of sow the seeds before we can really reap the harvest. But unfortunately, I think a lot of guys find out after the fact that you can really kind of burn your harvest down before you've really truly harvested it by, getting back into a contest prep too early, if you will, and dieting off some of that new muscle. I think a lot of us have been there before. And the unfortunate thing is those new gains are typically going to be the first to want to disappear once you get into the nitty gritty of the diet. So I think it's very important, if you're working with a coach, to understand that if they're not putting you in shows every 3, 4, 6 months, it's because they have a firm understanding that not only do you as an athlete need to grow that muscle, but you need to season it, you need to macerate it, you need to let that marinate. And that way, when you do come into your next show, 10 to 12 months later, you're going to have a lot greater likelihood of being able to hold on to that tissue, when your coach inevitably has to pull you down really low to get that last little bit of body fat off. I know what it's like to get on stage and to ultimately feel like you didn't make the wholesale improvements that were needed to make to, position yourself better in the placings or in the eyes of the judges. And it's a shitty feeling after working so hard. So the best way you can circumvent that and make sure that you don't experience that is just give yourself a healthy amount of time between your shows. Understand that the clout that you're looking for on the socials is going to be there when you've done the work accordingly to earn it. And, you've just got to really learn how to separate yourself from the now and the immediate gratification of constantly being lean in a show prep, and understand that the people that are really succeeding on the highest level of this sport have at some point or another put their time in, taken their time away from the clout, put their head into the gym, put their head into the food, kept their head down for months at a time, and done the work, even when it wasn't sexy and it wasn't getting high fives and applauses. You've got to be able to do that if you've got a future in this sport.
Amen, man. And you hit the nail right on the head, because if you look at Brett Wilkin and Hunter Labrada, some of these young guns that are on the rise, so to speak. I mean, they're taking a year off, they're taking 2 years off, they're taking 3 years off to put on that tissue, to put on the necessary mass. So I really appreciate you touching on that, Ty, because I feel like that's a missed aspect within the bodybuilding community and specifically competing. So it's good to hear guys like yourself talking about that. Now, I believe you are 13 days out currently. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Nice timing on that. Thank you, brother.
Yeah. Well, your IG post yesterday said 14 days out. So today would put us at 13. So why don't you talk about how this contest prep has gone? What show are you 13 days out from competing in? What is your goal? What are your plans for this competition? The rest of 2022, why don't we just discuss that? So first of all, what show are you 13 days out from? And then what's your goal for that show? And then how has this prep kind of gone so far?
Yeah, you bet. So we're just under, we're 13 days out of the NPC Midwest Championships. This show is actually going to be run as a pro-am alongside, I believe, an IFBB wellness show. I think there might be figure, there might be WPD. But anyways, yeah, it's going to be kind of a pro-am here that the Titonians put on here in the Midwest. They put on great shows, so I love to compete for them over in St. Louis. This show means a lot to me because I did this one back in 2019. I walked away with a super heavyweight class win, but I narrowly missed the overall. So you better believe I'm coming back for the redemption run this year. I would love to nab that overall. And there's a ton of hype coming into this one. You know, we've got Tyler Manning as the head judge, as this is going to be a pro-am show. So great opportunity to get feedback from one of the head honchos himself. A lot of big names in the house this year with former Mr. Olympia and current RO Classic winner Brandon Curry, fourth place Mr. Olympia last year, Hunter Labrada, our 212 Mr. O champion Derek Lunsford will be there, and Olympia legend Branch Warren will be there. So the energy in the room is just going to be insane. St. Louis usually draws a crowd of 3,000 to 4,000 people. So, man, I really just can't wait. This one really means a lot to me. And it's potentially going to set up a really big year for me as I contemplate both the Junior USA Championships as well as one of the 3 pro qualifiers on the calendar. So nothing set in stone beyond St. Louis just yet. You know, there's a great opportunity with St. Louis to get some feedback from Tyler Manning about what makes most sense for my year based off of what I'm able to show at this event. And, you know, we're going to really just kind of take it all in stride, but no plans to be done after this one. You know, this is, I don't like to use the phrase warm-up show at all. You know, I've got an immense level of respect for not only this show, but some of the competitors that I'm expecting to see here, both in some of the other classes, potentially as an overall battle, but even within my own class in the super heavyweights. This isn't going to be a walk for me, as there's going to be some good guys showing up. So all eyes set on this show, handling business, and then we'll reevaluate with the feedback and hopefully be on course for another big one here.
You sound like a true bodybuilder, Ty.
Yes, sir.
How being 13 days out, I know you're from your IG, you're getting into the low carbs and stuff like that. So we'll wrap things up here shortly because I'm again want to be respectful of your time and where you're at in your prep. But how has this prep gone up to this point? Has it been pretty smooth? Have there been some rough patches, maybe compared to other preps? Just talk about that for a minute, please.
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, it really started off seamlessly. I'm working with a coach by the name of Justin Mihaly. This is our first year working together. We're coming up on, I want to say 10 or 11 months of working in tandem. The prep really did start seamlessly. We had a great off season, which rolled right into the great start of a great prep back in December. And everything was actually going tremendously smoothly up until about middle January, when I ran into some misfortunate food poisoning that we had some trouble kind of identifying. And within a matter of just a few short days with some gastrointestinal backup and some related water retention that came with that infection, I found myself going from about a morning weight of 265. In a course of about 7 days, I was going to bed at like 289, 291, just from the infection, the inflammatory response. And man, it was so hard mentally to not just shut everything down. But, you know, at the time, I wasn't exactly sure what was going on with my body, and understanding that it could have been a whole host of things. You know, the worst thing I could have done at that point was shut it down mentally and then just like say, go into a binge, you know, like that could have had me up at like 320 or 330 pounds, you know, in a quick matter of time with no insight as to what was going on with me. So stayed on the course. Justin navigated me through that, kept my head on straight. And within 3 or 4 days time, after I hit that peak night weight of about 289, 291, just, ankles as thick as my knees, stomach just all the way out to here, just not going to the bathroom. I think I went like 96 hours without a bowel movement. Things finally started to dissipate. And within a week after that, weight had actually resettled back down into the low 270s. And then the prep was back on from there, and things started to move again. And haven't had any hiccups since then. Things have been trajecting just as we'd like. We basically got all the fat off that we wanted to for this show. Then we took a little period to kind of fill it back out, see what we were working with this past week. And now we find ourselves pulling it all back down with the goal in mind of having a perfect peak for St. Louis. So I thought I looked okay yesterday. And then today, I actually feel like I covered about 3 days of ground in just like 12 hours. So we're actually even potentially ahead of schedule in that this was going to maybe be like a full week of zero carbs. And we're actually going to start putting some in just around the training window today, just so, again, protect the muscle, protect the training session. We're very confident with where the body fat is, with the way the water's coming off, the way the body is responding to the protocols, the diureses. So everything's lined up to go perfect, man.
Love it. How much cardio is kind of, where are you at in terms of cardio right now?
Yeah. This is like really the first prep where I find myself not like actively chasing the condition this deep into the show. So, we had it up as high as 75 minutes, but right now it's at a steady 30 minutes, just continuing to keep the metabolism doing what we want it to do while every other part of the protocol kind of takes care of itself. And yeah, things are moving at a really good rate. This level of cardio is allowing me to keep my legs this year. Always a struggle for big guys, keeping the legs as you get into the nitty gritty of the diet. And that's something that's always plagued me too, in that, I'm a pretty big squatter and I love to train the legs, but there's usually a pretty precipitous drop off in both strength and leg size for me in that last month. And we've been able to really circumvent that. So I'm really happy with the legs I'm bringing, really happy with the conditioning I'm bringing. And, you could say arrogant if you want, but I've just always felt like I had the kind of physique that maybe didn't have to be just as conditioned as the next guy, because I do have inherently deep, good separation. I do have good shape, and, and all the fat's off me, I flow pretty well too. So kind of relying on all of that. And I think it's going to go great.
For sure. Justin, your coach, he's actually been a guest on the podcast. Super cool guy. Why did you decide to go with Justin in terms of your coach for this go around?
Yeah, well, a lot of guys know, some of you don't. My previous coach before Justin was actually Boston Lloyd, rest in peace. And, I actually stopped working with Boston a little over a year ago. And shortly after it was made public that he was going through some of the health problems that he was going through. And it was really important for me to just kind of take a step back and evaluate what I have, what's going on in my life, what my opportunities are, what I want from life outside of bodybuilding and beyond. And ultimately, I just felt like a different direction was needed. And Justin had been a peer and supporter of mine for a good while. I'd recently seen him do some good work with some bodybuilders that I don't consider to be anywhere near as talented as I am. And I think that's the hallmark of a really good quality coach, is when they can do good work with people that don't have great genetic inherent abilities. So one day I was actually talking to Justin when I was still kind of trying to identify what direction I might go in for my next coach. And I asked him if he could provide a short list of guys that he felt like might identify or match up well with like my personality, might like have a good beat on how to really dial in my physique, which I feel like up to this point, no one had really gotten anywhere even close to bringing out my peak potential, which is really frustrating. We only get so many shots at this. And anyway, so I asked Justin that question, and I was actually taken aback when he put himself right out there. He said, me, and me. I kind of thought he'd say like, Matt Jansen, which like, he was working with Matt at the time, and a couple other big names that, are known for bringing in, super heavyweights and such. But no, he said him. And I said, fuck it. I'm ready to work with somebody that wants to work with me, somebody that cares, and, someone that is continuing to invest and reinvest themselves in the knowledge, in the educational side of the sport, as opposed to someone like Austin, who had accrued a lot of knowledge over the years, but it was basically just through, seeking out programs from some of the other top minds in the sport. And, I think we've learned a lot about, health, PED usage, training, things like that in the last few years that I think a lot of the top minds in the sport from yesteryear probably haven't vested themselves into the degree that someone like Justin has. So, I was really looking to take a new school direction, a healthier direction, and a more in touch direction. I think I picked a right decision for me.
Excellent. All right, we're gonna wrap it up here in a couple minutes. Ty, I want to ask you, first of all, are you an individual who writes their goals out, or writes their dreams out, or writes their visions out for their life, or are you somebody that just kind of has that in your mind or in your heart?
I'm a mind and heart guy, man, and I have all the respect in the world for the guys that wake up every day and on their mirrors, I'm going to win this. Or every time they're doing the dishes, like they see a note that says, I'm going to win that. And like, that's cool. But, I remember being 9 years old and in fourth grade, and the teacher handed out the planners. And I remember right then there, I said, I'm not going to do anything with this shit. It's just not in me. I'm not the type to write things down and stuff. And, I think I've gotten pretty far in my life, just kind of being who I am intrinsically. So, I tried doing that one year where I just wrote my shit on the wall, and I didn't win what I wanted to win. And so that's neither here nor there. But yeah, for me, it's all what's going on the inside. I don't need a piece of paper with, 14-point Times New Roman font to tell me I want to win something. I'm either going to do the work or I'm not.
Love it. So I asked that because I want to kind of hear from you then, Ty, kind of what is when you're just kind of alone thinking about your life, your bodybuilding experiences, kind of what you want things to become in terms of bodybuilding. What is kind of that future plan, future vision, future goals in terms of bodybuilding specifically for yourself?
Yeah, best case scenario, I'd love to see myself competing with the very, very best in the world. I don't see any reason why that's not an absolute possibility for me if, all of the collective pieces come together and I'm able to keep my head on straight through that process, which, I think keeping a good head and being able to have an overriding level of consistency is the most important factor in getting to where you want to go in this sport. But, I do feel blessed that this sport has now finally started giving back to me in a multitude of ways, not only through sponsorship opportunities, but, I've gotten into business for myself as a personal trainer and a coach. And, I love to give back to other athletes, not only here locally, but, in a remote fashion as well. So no matter what happens with my personal bodybuilding endeavors, I'm very confident that there's a place for me in this industry, so long as I continue to want to have a place for it. But, kind of going back to what we talked about earlier, I don't like to focus too much in on the long-term future. I'm more of let me really kind of enjoy the 6 feet in front of me and let me just be all in with that and let me soak all that up. And, I feel like if I really just make sure I'm always crossing my T's, dotting my I's, and keeping my head on straight, things are going to go the way I want them to go.
Beautiful. 100%. Okay. What do you feel like, Ty, bodybuilding has taught you, or what do you feel like bodybuilding has given you in terms of your life?
That's a great question to wrap on. It's a great question. I mean, without being entirely too cliche, it's taught me an immense level of personal discipline that I don't think you're going to be able to get from any other sport or opportunity or extracurricular that you get into. I'm sure plenty of people saw that DK Metcalf quote from the other day about, eating a couple bags of candy and like one whole food meal and a pot of coffee. Like, never in your wildest dreams in a sport like this could you imagine being successful with so much negligence towards your daily processes. And, you know, yeah, it's easy to do the day in, day out of the sport when the conditions are prime and they're easy. But, you know, say you're in the nitty gritty of the prep and, you know, you barely have the energy to pull your legs out of bed and stick your legs through your pant legs and put your socks and shoes on and stuff. And, you know, we all go through that at times, but life doesn't slow down for us even when we're dealing with that. And that's where it takes a really mentally strong and resilient individual to not fall back on all of your other life priorities and responsibilities when you feel that way. You know, not only that, but, you know, there are people that rely on you, and, you know, you've got to be able to bring it for those people on an emotional level, on a mental level. And I think this sport either teaches you to do that, or it teaches you what you're not made of, and you end up quitting and running from it, which a lot of guys do when the going gets hard. So
cool. All right, before I give you kind of the platform to give any shout outs or share any final thoughts or words from your Instagram, I just kind of want to give you an opportunity to talk about your significant other. It seems like she's a really big part of your life, and I'm sure she's a big part of this whole bodybuilding experience that you're going through, and I'm sure she's going through it with you. So why don't you talk about your significant other? How did you guys meet? What does she mean to you? And I'll just let you share a few thoughts on her.
yeah, bless her heart. I've been married to my wife, Ariana, now for the better part of a year and change. We've been together since late 2017, and she's actually been a huge catalyst in the development of my bodybuilding. And that you guys all probably know, if you've seen my Instagram, she is a national level competitor. She was formerly a bikini competitor, now making her way in the figure. And we actually met in 2017 with her coming off a series of regional NPC class overall wins. And, you know, of course, she's a beautiful, beautiful, fierce, strong woman. But it was her winning ways and her winning attitude that really, really attracted me in the first place. And, you know, I wanted to be associated with and carry myself alongside a winner. You know, like, it was really important to me after coming out of a long-term relationship with a woman that she was successful in her own personal life, in her own dealings, but she didn't have any like strong geared hobbies or interests or anything that really moved her life or conversely motivated me to propel my life forward. And, you know, the second I started dating Ariana, you know, my desire to keep up with her prowess as a competitive bodybuilder really forced me to be a better bodybuilder, but also forced me to grow up and be a better man. So I thank her for, you know, constantly keeping me honest in those respects, you know. And a lot of people, you know, might suggest that, you know, dating somebody within the confines of the fitness industry won't necessarily work. But I think it all boils down to who you are as people before you found the industry and what you're looking for out of the industry, you know. And I think both of us are heavily focused on success and accomplishment, and not so much focused on clout and attention. You know, I think if one of us was more focused on simple clout and attention, we wouldn't have gotten as far we've gotten. But we're both just so focused on achieving our goals and achieving them in a timely manner so that we can, you know, get into the next phase of our life at some point with children, a family, and more focus on our home and our experiences together rather than this selfish bodybuilding experience. You know, I think collectively we've always been on the same page there, and we want the same things from life.
Love it, man. All right, Ty, first of all, I just want to again thank you so much for coming on to Behind the Muscle podcast. 13 days out from competing. I greatly appreciate it. I appreciate you sharing your story, sharing about this prep and just kind of some of your future plans within bodybuilding. Before I do the outro here and close us out, if you have any final thoughts, any final words that you'd like to share with us, please feel free to do that. I know that through your Instagram, just kind of going through there, that you do some coaching and training yourself. So any type of shout out, sponsors, where can people connect with you? All that good stuff, man. Share that with us, please.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to drop some thank yous. You know, I'd be remiss without thanking some of my sponsors who've been supporting me this whole way. I'll go ahead and mention Jed North here. They provide me with all of my training clothing, all of my streetwear clothing. My closet's completely Jed North out, and I feel very, very blessed to be a part of that team. They've been supporting me for the better part of a year and a half now. You guys can support me too with some of the best threads in the game by using code Ty Jordan at checkout at jednorth.com. Next up, I want to talk about my supplement sponsor, who I've actually been with since 2019 after my first run at the St. Louis NPC Midwest Championships. This brand has continued to grow every single season, adding new, great, innovative products to the line, and that is Phase 1 Nutrition. Here's one of their many pre-workouts. This is the Brain Blitz. It's a nootropic-based product that I've been using a ton of, as my focus and my ability to really lock in without the carbohydrates tends to decrease. Another new product from them, it's a great non-stim capsulated pump product, the Pump Phase Extreme. Loving this, but yeah, they cover me for my protein, my aminos, my health support products. They've got a great internal cycle phase product that really covers all of your comprehensive internal needs. So a great brand to support me deep into the prep as well as the off season. And then the last one I'll go ahead and drop here is I am an ambassador with the Flavor Gang, and anybody who is dieting knows just how important it is to get the most out of your food so that you don't go batshit crazy. They've got like 10 or 12 of the best low calorie sauces you're going to find. Most of them between 5 and 15 calories per serving when you measure it out on the scale. This is one of my favorites, the takeout sauce. And if you're a cream of rice fiend, like most of us who do this bodybuilding experience are, they've got a host of flavored cream of rices. That's the birthday cake flavor. But there's 4 or 5 flavors. There's more in production. I love the Flavor Gang, and I love what they do. And it's a company that's actually run and operated by an IFBB pro bodybuilder named Ross Flanagan. So you guys, put your money into the bodybuilders, quit buying the G Hughes sauce from the Walmart, get behind the real bodybuilder and get behind me while you're at it. So for all 3 of those companies, whether it be Jed North, Flavor Gang, or Phase 1 Nutrition, you can support me and those great companies by using code Ty Jordan at checkout.
Very cool. Now, why don't you give us your Instagram handle, Ty, and then is that where people who want to be trained by you, coached by you, is that where they would reach out to you, is through your Instagram?
You bet. So yeah, the Instagram is the primary platform you're going to find me on. Right now, I don't really have a whole lot of time to dabble with things like TikTok and stuff, but yeah, my Instagram is Ty_Jordan_bodybuilding. And in my Instagram bio link, you're actually going to see a link to my YouTube page. You can also find my YouTube by just searching Ty Jordan Bodybuilding. And I actually ran a comprehensive video prep series starting at about, I want to say like 20 weeks out. And I did like 1 or 2 videos every other week all the way into the show. And I think I got some really great content. And I'm just really excited about that. The big difference between Instagram versus YouTube is that, no matter how great, an Instagram post might be, eventually it makes its way down the list and probably never to be seen again. Whereas some of this YouTube content I've made, while it might not be getting a whole lot of views now, I'm very confident where I'm going, and that, in a couple of years' time or even less, there's going to be a lot of people interested in knowing who I am, where I came from, and how I got to the place that I am at whatever point in time it is. And I think that's where the value of the YouTube comes in, because that content doesn't go away. So guys, if you want to get more familiar with me, see how I train, see me in and out of the gym, as I have some day in the life videos in there as well, even get some cooking inspo for me, get over to my Instagram. My YouTube bio is in there, Ty Jordan Bodybuilding. Check out my prep series for this 2022 season. I think you're really going to like some of this content.
Excellent. All right, Ty, I appreciate your time, my man.
Hell yeah, Quinn. Thanks for having the time. Thanks for putting me on, man. I really appreciate this. Look forward to this one coming out.
For sure. All of you who are tuning into another episode of Behind the Muscle podcast, I just want to say thank you. I greatly appreciate you. If it wasn't for you guys, the podcast wouldn't exist. A couple of quick things before we wrap up, close out this conversation with Ty. If you haven't done so already, make sure you go over to Behind the Muscle podcast YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Super important because I release all of these episodes first on YouTube, and then I'll distribute them to the other podcast platforms. If you're somebody who wants to listen to Behind the Muscle podcast outside of YouTube, we're on iTunes, Castbox, some of the other main platforms for podcasts. So you can find us in iTunes, Castbox, some of the other places as well. One last favor I'd ask of all of you here quickly. Take this episode with Ty Jordan, share it on your Instagram stories. Make sure you tag Behind the Muscle, tag Ty, so that we know that you listened to this episode and found great value in it. And then finally, I will leave you all with this. Remember, behind the muscle, there's always a story. We'll catch you guys later.